Good afternoon to all the grade 12s. I hope you had a good afternoon and that you are revived to start again with a new section. I am Mrs. Greiling and I will be presenting the topic inflation with you this afternoon. I don't know how many of you were fortunate to watch the news last night and to hear the Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, midterm speech regarding the current economic situations. Because when we speak of inflation, it has a direct impact on our daily lives. So yes, inflation is a topic that is really appropriate to each one of us, and it affects our daily living. So today I'm going to try and explain to you not only what inflation is, but what is required from you, especially now in the exams. What must you be able to do regarding inflation? Right, let us start. What is inflation? I want you to sit back and watch the following. Yes, what did you notice? If we look at inflation, the word inflate means to make bigger and bigger. The most appropriate example that we have is in our daily lives when I have to inflate a balloon. When I start, it starts small, and as the time goes by and I inflate it with more air, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But how's that appropriate to our maths? When I speak of inflation, it means that prices are getting bigger and bigger, which of course means things are just getting more and more expensive. Now, what causes inflation? What is the causes to make the prices go up? And as we know, it happens constantly in our lives. The first cause of inflation is the demand pool inflation. This is a type of inflation caused by an increase in demand or in the supply of money. If I could link that to what is currently going on in our country, it means that our country needs money because we need to create jobs. We need to be able to supply people with salaries, and that then puts a demand on the inflation. The second type is the cost push inflation. This is a type of inflation caused by the substantial increase of important goods or services when no suitable alternative is available. Last night in the midterm budget speech, they spoke of our country that has to import so many products, but we are not exporting enough. So we need certain goods and products, and we don't always have it in our own country. And it is products that we need. So in order to fulfill the need in our country, we need to import more. And thus, it causes inflation to increase. The third cause of inflation is there's a typo, built-in inflation. A type of inflation that results from past events and persists in the present. It's called the time value of money. If we look at some countries overseas, example like Italy or mostly Greece last year, in their country they had a big economical problem. And that also is something that caused that country's inflation to increase. So in our country, if, for example, say there was a war, etc., those are also built-in factors that causes inflation to increase. So I hope you've got a bigger picture of the things that influences or causes inflation to increase. This is not important for the exam, but when we study a certain topic, it is good to understand what it means and where it comes from before we can continue. Now, where does inflation fit into our whole picture of our curriculum that we've been studying the whole year? Throughout many of the other lessons that you've listened to, you have heard many of the presenters speaking of Learning Outcome 1, where we work with numbers and operations. Now, when we look at learning outcome 1, inflation also forms part of our numbers and our operations in context, because you must be able to calculate inflation. The second thing is that when we work with inflation, we use certain formula. Now that refers to learning outcome 2, where we also have to be able to use those formula. A little bit later, I'm going to show you the formula, because sometimes they give it in the question papers and sometimes they don't. So it is of vital importance that you must know your formula, because you won't know whether they are going to give these specific formulae or not. Then, most importantly, when I work with inflation, it is data. And we have had now many presenters that spoke about data and data handling. So when we look at inflation, it is also used as a set of data. So what must you be able to do with the data? You should be able to organize it, maybe in a tally or frequency table. You must be able to analyze it by finding the average, maybe the mean, the median, etc. The third thing that you must be able to do with this data is to be able to present it in a graph, but more important, when it is given to you in the form of a graph, you must be able to analyze it and interpret it. And one of the most popular questions that's always asked is that you must be able to describe the trend or the tendency. And to put that in a plain language, it means you must be able to write down that what you see is happening in the graph. But we'll also do some examples of that as well. Did you know that currently our country's inflation is 5.9%? And the only way that you can find out more information about inflation is by reading magazines, reading the newspaper, and also watching television. Because frequently on the news, they refer to these important figures. And as I said in the beginning, it is something that touches our lives daily. Right, we continue to the next one. The definition of inflation. When I look at the definition, inflation refers to the general increase in prices. Here, I want to show you a price tag at a shop, where on the price tag, I hope you can see this, the original price of the item was 140 Rand. Then there was a second value that was also marked on it, and it was 150 Rand. So there you can see that the same product price has increased. How is that possible? This specific example was due to a shortage of cotton. So what they had to do is they had to increase the price of the garments that were made of cotton, because at that specific time there was a shortage of cotton. Now, in our first slide, we looked at the causes of inflation. And one of them was the demand pull inflation. If there's a demand for something, it increases the inflation. In this instance, when I look at this example, it shows you that there wasn't cotton, so there was a huge demand for it. So it increased the inflation due to the demand of it. Now, secondly, if I look at the definition, it says a decrease in the purchasing power of money. I just want you to look at that section first. Decrease in the purchasing power of money. Now, I wonder how many of you can remember last year's value of your money. You could have taken a 20 rand and go to a store and buy 2 liters of milk and a bread. But this year, if I want to do the same, I realize that my 20 rand can only buy 2 liters of milk. It cannot these days buy 2 liters of milk and a bread. So that shows you that your money has decreased its power of purchasing. So very important, I repeat it again, inflation does not only refer to the increase of prices, but also to the decreasing in the purchasing power of your money. But very important, look at the next part, it says, when measured against a particular standard. So I can just not go out into the world and say, oh, but our money has lost its value. It must be measured against a certain standard. And that standard is called CPI. We are going to learn a bit more about the CPI in a while. There's another example for you. In 1955, the price of milk was 10 cents per litre. In 1968, it was 84 cents per litre. And today, it's approximately 8.50 rand per litre. Yes, the times have changed. Some things get more expensive. But can you do the same with the same amount that you did a while ago? And the answer is definitely no. And why? Because of inflation. Now, let us quickly look at some keywords. Because when you come across these words in a question paper, it is important that you understand what they represent, what they stand for, and what they mean. The first one is Consumer Price Index. If you listen on the radio or over the news, when they do the financial information of the day, they often use this terminology. But what does it mean? This is the index that is used, which is also called the cost of living index. As I say, we know we have a lot of economical strains on our country, and things get more expensive. And can people still survive with the income which they have? And the CPI, therefore, gives them an index to see, but what is the current cost of living? It is used to measure inflation in South Africa by Statistics South Africa. So if you want to Google some more information about the CPI or inflation, a very good place to start is to go to the website of Statistics South Africa and find out a little bit more, because they are the ones that compile all of this information for us, so that it's not necessary for us to go out and to collect the data ourselves. Lastly, it is given as a percentage. This refers now to the inflation. The inflation rate is always in a percentage. And as I said, it was mentioned last night on the radio, on the television, that our current inflation rate is 5.9%. So already you must be alert to know what are the type of calculations I'm going to do. I'm definitely going to work with percentages. Another important thing to remember when we work with the Consumer Price Index, and we'll do some examples of that too, is that there are 3 different CPI indexes. The first one is just the plain CPI. I'll give you an explanation of that now. And then there's also a CPIX and a CPIF. The only difference is the one with the F refers to the total inflation, but they exclude home loans, and mortgages. And when it is the CPIF, the F stands for food. So now it only takes the inflation rate of food into consideration. At a later stage, I'll also give you an example and an exercise to do on that. Right, now, how is it measured? Now, it is determined by changes in the prices that the typical urban consumer pays for a representative basket of goods and services. I want to go back to that part where it says the typical urban consumer. Why don't they take rural consumers? Because for us who live in the rural areas, our products need to be delivered. So what is automatically added to our prices? Of course, the transport. So when they do the inflation rate and determine what it is, they focus on urban products. Now, what it also mentioned is that it is goods and services. So if I speak of a representative basket, there is a picture of the basket, but that is only a representation of the food section. If you look at the second bullet, it says approximately 1,500 items are included in an imaginary basket. Yes, such as groceries, clothing, transport, and there's a few others. And one thing I'd also like to bring to your attention is that electricity is also added to this. So when they determine the inflation rate, they bring all of this into consideration. Note, however, it does not mean, say for instance, I'll take one of the items in the basket. Let's take chips. We all love Simba. Now, if I take Simba's price today and tomorrow, it will maybe show an increase, or from 1 month to the next. Maybe the increase is 20 cents or 30 cents. And then I take clothing items. Now, the increase in clothing items will definitely not be 30 cents. So when we look at the inflation rate, it is not to say that every item in that basket increased with the same amount. So, very important, they don't increase with the same percentages, but they are all put together. And now I wonder, whom of you can tell me what will then be used as an answer to the inflation rate? Let us see whom of you were right. The inflation rate is calculated monthly. Now, please remember that we're going to use it somewhere else. It is calculated monthly, but averaged and compounded annually. Now, there I've highlighted the word for you, averaged, because in the beginning I said we work with data. And if I speak of the averaged rate, then I'm speaking of the mean. So yes, my data set will be the monthly numbers, and then I find the mean or the average for my yearly inflation rate. So you can see already what are all the possible calculations you must be able to do. The next one, it says compounded annually. I wonder if you are aware that that sounds very familiar, because we've learned of simple interest and we've learned of compound interest, and now they are saying that inflation rate is compounded annually. Yes, of course I can use the compound interest formula to calculate the inflation rate. So now once again, there's the formula that I spoke of that you are definitely going to have to use and know as well. Then the next one, The inflation rate represents an average price increase. Remember what I said? The clothing items and the Simba cannot increase with the same number. But what they do is they take 1,500 different items and they find the mean of those items. And that's what we get from Statistics South Africa. And what is it currently? 5.9%. Right, so now you already get a bigger picture. Where does inflation come into our papers? How must I be able to answer it? Now, the next one, what I want to show you, is now a graph representing the data. Because what must you be able to do? And this is especially paper 2 type of question. Interpreting the data on a graph. There is the graph. South Africa's average annual inflation rate from 1982 to 2011. Now, if I look at that, it shows you the annual inflation rate over a period of 28 years. Remember what I said? What is a typical question they love to ask in a paper 2 question? What tendency do you notice? Or what is the trend of the inflation? Are you able to answer me in a full sentence? And please don't say it goes up or it goes down. A balloon which is inflated goes up. But if I'm working with paper 2, people, it is very important that you use good language to express what you see is happening. I can start and see that, yes, I can see the graph goes up and down, but you mustn't write in a question paper, in your answers, it goes up and down. If I see that in the graph the values go down, the correct terminology is the values decrease. Please write it down and go practice your formulation of your sentences. The value decrease. And in this case, it is the inflation rate that decrease. So don't just write in your sentences, it goes up and it goes down. Be specific. The inflation rate decreases. And best yet is to add a value. Yes, then I can look at my graph and I see sometimes the graph goes up, but remember I don't write the graph goes up. What do I say? I say that the inflation rate increases. Once again, write it down, go practice it in your formulation of your sentences. So if I look at the overall tendency of this graph, I can see that the inflation rate has from 86, look at the value of 86, where it was almost 19%, which is extremely high for a country's inflation. And then it gradually came down with a few fluctuations up to 2004, where it was at its lowest. Now there are already two possible questions. When was the inflation at its highest? Or when was the inflation at its lowest? And then you can see that it then maybe started increasing. Up to 2010, it decreased. Now I wonder which big event happened in 2010 to ensure that there was a lot of money in our country, which brought down the inflation. I wonder if you know, or whether you can remember. Of course, the soccer of 2010, the World Cup that was hosted. So can you see good things that happen in our country bring in lots of money? And if the money comes into our country, what happens? The inflation comes down. There I can see it, the positive effect that it had on our country. And then gradually after that, what do I notice? it started to increase again. And as I say, now we know it is 5,9. So there is a possible question. Looking at the graph, interpreting what is happening in the graph, writing good sentences, using the correct terminology, and very important, add values. If I say in 2010 the inflation was very low, then I must be able to say, oh, it was approximately 4,1 or 4,2%. So in your answers, good language, write the words of the things that you are working with, and then add values. That shows that you understand what you are working with and that you have interpreted the question. Right. Something I also want you to remember is when we look at a graph overall, please make sure that you understand what is represented by your x-axis and what is represented by your y-axis. Because when I write my sentences, I must be able to say that in 2010, I've used my value of my x-axis and I've used the value of my y-axis. So I said 2010, it was about 4,1 or 2, and it was 4,1 or 2% in the year 2010. So use your axes as references. When I look at that last bullet, it says, an increase in the slope means that the inflation rate is rising, or another word that you can put in the place of rising is increasing. That's a very good sentence to remember if you have to write an answer in the exam. While a decrease in the slope means that it is decreasing. And this is also known as deflation. Remember, our topic for this afternoon is inflation, making it bigger. And this one says deflation. But now look at the last part of that. It says deflation does not mean a decrease in prices. Only a negative inflation rate will result in the decrease of prices. I'll repeat that again. Deflation means a decrease in the inflation rate. Say, for instance, it was 5,9 and next month it is 5,6. So it means there was a deflation in the increase in the inflation rate. It does not mean the prices are coming down. It's just the inflation rate that came down. Now, only a negative inflation rate. That means if it is minus 5,9, only then will the prices come down. I will also do an example with you to show you where we have a negative inflation rate and how it affects your calculations. Right, the next slide I want to show you is unfortunately about American dollar and the inflation rate of the dollar. But remember, our context is also about global issues. So I'm going to show you the graph. It is the United States inflation rate over a huge period, 90 or 100-year period. And what is important there is to see, to show you an example of where the inflation rate was negative. So in that period of times, I am trying to indicate it to you, in that period of times, they had a decrease in their prices. Why? Because look at my y-axis. That is all my positive values, and these are all my negative values. Remember, that is one type of graph you must know. is to be able to know if graphs have negative values, what that means. So this instance, it's a graph that you can interpret showing you the negative values of inflation, which of course means that the inflation has decreased, the prices have decreased. And once again, you can look at the tendency, and since then it has more been positive, which means it was an increase in the inflation. And just before 2010, there was again a negative inflation rate, which showed that the prices came down. So yes, even though it's from America, we can also use it in our questions to see what effect it has. And remember, we are also working with exchange rates. You must be able to convert between different currencies. So this can also be used in questions like those. Right, as I said, I will do an example with you where the inflation rate is negative, where some or other goods prices have decreased. Once again, a possible question that can be asked here for you is to find the average or the mean inflation rate. And once again, describe the trend or the tendency of the inflation rate. So there are a few possible questions. Right, now we're going to move on to the section that I think you are all waiting for, to say, but what calculations must I be able to do? There is the first one. You must be able to calculate the new price of an item using the average inflation rate. As we know, one of the best investments a person can make is to buy property or a house. And because of inflation, it's such a good investment. Now let us look at the question. It says, a house is bought for 950,000 rand. The price of the house increases at an average rate of inflation of 7.5% per year. How much will this house be worth in 2 years' time? Some hint that I want to give you is that when I look at any question, there are two things every question has. The first one is the question gives me certain information. Now, if I say it gives you information, I've actually highlighted for you in this example to show you how many things they gave you to help you to understand the question. It gave you the price of the house, which was 950,000. It told you that it increases. So immediately you must think, right, it's not going to become less than 950. My final answer must obviously be more than 950. So those are little keywords to help you. And then, of course, another value that they gave was the 7.5%, so that I know how much it must increase. And then the last part that I highlighted for you was to say that for how long in a period is it going to increase, which is 2 years. I said a question has two things. The first one was, look what the question gives. I highlighted them for you in blue. And now let's come to the second part of what every question has. And that is, of course, what does the question ask? In this instance, the question asked, how much will it cost over this period of time? I'm going to repeat it again. Look what the question gives. Look at the important information the question gives before I go to the part to see, but what does the question ask? then only I can go to my calculations. Because now I understand what they have given to me. They've given to me values. They've given to me a word that tells me it's going to increase. They've given me by how much it's going to increase. And they also said over what period of time it's going to increase. My question, how much must it be in the end? So if my answer is in years, I know it cannot be right. Because what did the question ask? How much? Then I know it must be in rand. So how will I go about in solving this problem? So I said in the beginning, when we work with inflation rates, it is percentage. And now I have to use my calculating skills where I have learned to work with percentage. Right. What do? I say 7 for year 1. Be careful now, remember there's 2 years. Year 1, it increased with 7.5%. So I take my calculator and I say, I'm going to show you this one just to make sure that you can remember how to use your calculator when it gets to the percentages. Right. There's the calculator. The question was 7.5%. So remember, we say comma, but what do we use on the calculator? We use the decimal point. So 7.5, and now it is percent, but it means over 100. So I'm going to divide it by 100, and that is equals to 0.075 multiply by my amount, what that was, 950,000, which gives you 71,250. Right, now we go back. I said the first one, I calculate, but be very careful, because this 7.5% is only the increase. Remember, we want to know how much will it be at the end of the first year. So what is the important thing to add? Now I must go add my increase to what it was originally. So with the first year's inflation rate, now that house of 950,000 is already worth over R1 million. That we've only done 1 year. Then I have to repeat the same with the second year. I will say, and now this is the catching point, because the 7.5% is not calculated on the original 950. Remember, it is a year later. The house is now worth more than it was originally. So I have to calculate the inflation rate on the new value of the house, the one that has already the inflation compounded. And that gives you then an amount of 76,596.75. But once again, what do I have to do? I have to add the increase to the original amount, which then gives you almost 1,100,000 if it's rounded. Now I know many of your teachers teach you different methods, and I'm just going to show you an alternative method for this question, where we first, in this example, we first calculated the 7.5 and then we added it. The second year, we first calculate the interest and then we add it. But because I know there's some teachers that use a different method, I will just show you that method as well. Right, we're going to use the same question, but I just want to show you the alternative method. Because if I look at the question, it says the 7.5% is added. So many teachers teach you that you say it is your 100%, which is the 950, plus the increase of 7.5%, which gives you then a total of 107.5%. So now I can calculate it in that way, and then I can say, but it is 107.5% multiply by the 950,000, and I want to show that to you on the calculator. So I'm going to say 107.5. Remember, it's percent, so I must divide it by 100, and then I can multiply it by 950,000. And what do you see? For the first year, my answer is 1,21,250. But once again, remember, I'm just going to write it here. It says year 1. Now I still need to go to year 2. But my inflation rate stays the same. So it's going to be 107.5% multiply, and remember this is the catching point, not on the original value, but on the inflated value, which is 1,021,250. If I do that on the calculator, let us just do that, 107.5%, which means divide by 100, multiply by 1,021,250, and let us see what's the final answer, 1,097,843.75. Remember, this is an alternative method. So let us just quickly go back to the previous method that we used, and let us see whether the answers are the same. And yes, the values are the same. 1,097,843.75 rand. This is to show you that yes, there are different methods in getting to the answer. But what is important is to go back to your question and think what your question asked. Remember, it said, how much will it be in 2 years' time? I've highlighted the answer for you in red to say, how much, then it means my answer must be in rand. And that's how I can check to see whether I have answered my question. Right. Now, we are going to go to the second type of questions that you must be able to calculate. And now you must pay very good attention. You must be able to calculate the inflation rate. Remember I said on the news last night, they gave us the inflation rate, which is 5.9%. But for you in the exams, it is expected of you to be able to calculate the inflation rate. But don't worry, they will give you enough information to be able to do it. Remember my secret. Look what the question gives, because from that you will be able to answer it. Now here is an example. First of all, I want you to memorize this formula, because what I said is that sometimes, and you can go look at past question papers, sometimes they give you the formula and sometimes they don't. In the example of the question paper I'm going to show you a bit later, they did not give it. So, for your own sake, go and learn it. But there's an easy way. I'll show that to you just now. So, formula. The formula for inflation, for calculating the inflation rate, is the increase in price during 1 year. That will be an amount over the initial price, or a word that I often like to use is the original price. And remember, rate, inflation rate is always measured in percentage. So I have to multiply by 100%. Formula, very, very important. Go learn it. Now here is an example. If I use washing powder, it is a product that we all use daily. On the 1st of January 2012, it was 46 Rand 95. But this year, in January 2013, the same powder, and I can tell you it's the 2 kilogram bag, cost 58 Rand 69. So now there you can see already there's a huge increase. Now the question will ask you, calculate the inflation rate of the product. What is the first thing I do? I write down my formula. And as is the case with any formula, the second rule after I've written down a formula is, of course, substitution. So they tell you what is the information that they need, and you must just go find it and substitute it. It says the increase in the price. That means the difference from the cheapest to the most expensive. So I will subtract them to find the difference over the original price, which of course was what it was first, which is 46 Rand 95. Because it's percentage, multiply by 100%. Then I simplify it. If I find the increase, it increased with 11 Rand 74 over the original amount, which was 46 Rand 95. And if I calculate that, I think I will show that to you. Where did I get to 25%? Right. Just to write it down for you again. It is now the inflation rate, which was 11 Rand 74 over 46 Rand 95. And because it's percentage, I multiply by 100%. Now if I take my calculator, it is 11.74 divided by 46.95. I get my answer and I multiply it by 100. And there is the answer. 25, I'm going to write it here, 25,005324881. And the reason why I'm writing it all down is because you are supposed to round your final answer to 2 decimals, which rounded gives you 25%. Right. Now, I said I wanted to show you a secret, because the formula that we needed for now is not always available, and you must be able to remember it. Now, if I look at that formula, it says inflation rate is the increase in the price over the initial price multiplied by 100%. That is that formula that is used for various calculations. And I want to quickly write them down for you so you can also go and remember them. Right. The first one I have given to you now, you said it's in the inflation rate. But there are other formulas that are similar. It says percentage increase. That's a question I am sure you have come across many times. Calculate the percentage increase. And how do you calculate it? It is the increase over the original number multiply by 100%. You can substitute the values and you can find the percentage increase. There's another question that often appears in the question papers. It says, calculate the percentage decrease. How do I calculate that? It's so similar. it is you have to find the decrease over the original number multiply by 100%. Do you notice any similarities? I think so. It's getting easier and easier. There's another one. Percentage, the question will say, calculate the percentage change. I wonder if you can predict what the formula is going to be. It's going to be the change over the original number multiply by 100%. I have to calculate the inflation rate. What is it going to be? The inflation rate is the change in the price over the original number multiply by 100%. So yes, sometimes they give it, sometimes they don't. But what is important is that you must know them. Because like I showed you now, they use it in every question paper. Whether they refer to the percentage increase, the percentage decrease, the percentage change, or even now calculating the inflation rate. The principle of calculating them is the same, and that's why the formulas are similar. So it is not that difficult to go memorize them, because sometimes, as I say, you will find that are not in the question paper. But when you see that terminology, you will know what to do. Right, we are going to go for a short break now. And after the break, we will come back and look at some possible questions that could appear in the paper and some applications of what we have learned now. So remember, if I just can quickly conclude before you break so that you don't forget everything, is that you must know what is inflation. Yes, you must understand what causes it. But more importantly, when it's given to you in the form of a graph, you must be able to interpret it and understand what is happening. What are the calculations that are expected of you? The first one is to calculate a new price if there is inflation. And the one that we've just done is to be able to calculate the inflation rate. And once again, the information that you need will be given to you, but you need your formula to be able to calculate it. Go stand up, stretch your legs, drink a bit of water, because remember, while studying, it's always very good to drink some water. It revives your brain, it helps you to concentrate, and it even keeps you a bit alert. We'll be back in a short time. Thank you. If it was in the exam, you would have looked at all the data. Remember what I said previously. Look what the question gives. You cannot skip the information and go directly to the questions. Then you will not be able to answer them. And then you will often find that you are answering questions that are not relevant. So please make the time in the exam. Study the information that they give. Make sure that you are aware of what happens with the information. Now we can go to our first question. Number 1. By how much did the price of chicken change from January 2008 to February 2008? Now let us go to the chicken. A 2 kilogram chicken was in January 28 Rand 23. And in February 24 Rand 92. Now the question didn't ask the inflation rate, but I want to show you that it can be calculated. I'm going to answer this question, but also calculate the inflation rate. Now to do so, I will show you. the inflation rate. Sorry, it's upside down. Can you please fix it for us? Right, the inflation, the price of the chicken. If we quickly look at the first price of the first price in, I'm going to write it here, January 2008, and the price of it was in February 2008. In January it was 28 Rand 23, and in February it was 24 Rand 92. So what is the first thing that you noticed? From 28 to 24, what happened? There was a decrease. So yes, the price of the chicken came down. So that was the first question. Question 1 asked, by how much did the price of the chicken change? So it will be 28 Rand 23 minus the 24 Rand 92, and if I subtract that, it gives you 3 Rand 31. That is by how much it decreased. But I asked you, we must also be able to calculate the inflation rate. And I want to show you how I calculate the inflation rate. What is the first thing that I have to write down? Is of course my formula. So I start with my formula. Inflation rate is equals to the increase, but in this instance it's not an increase but a decrease. So we write it is the decrease in the price over the initial price multiplied by 100%. There's my formula. When I'm working with a formula, my second rule is always to substitute. The decrease I've already calculated, but I can still do it by saying it is the 24 Rand 92 minus the 28 Rand. Now you're going to ask me, but why do I do that? Because if I look at my original formula, it said the increase, and it's usually the new price minus the old price. I'm going to put it here in brackets. If you look at many question papers, they also give you these terms. New price minus the old price over the old price. You can go look this up and you will find that often they refer to those terms as well. So to find the decrease, it is the new price minus the old price over the initial price, which was 28 Rand 23. It's a percentage we're calculating, so we multiply by 100%. Now when I simplify it, it gives you minus 3 Rand 31 over 28 Rand 23 multiply by 100%. And if I simplify it, it gives you minus 11.7%. Now what is important about that final answer? What did we say? It is not deflation that causes prices to drop. It is only when the inflation rate is negative that prices decrease. So in this instance, the inflation rate of the chicken was minus 11.7%. And that is why the price decreased from 28 Rand 23 to 24 Rand 92. Right. Let us have a look at another possible question. If the inflation rate from February 2008 to March 2008 was 1.6%, determine how much Solly might have paid for a 12.5 kilogram packet of flour in March 2008. what must I go find first? I have to go look for the flour. There, I've marked it for you. Flour, 12,5 kilogram. January, it was 64.72. February, it was 72.24. But now, the flour's inflation rate was 1,6%. Do you notice something? In the beginning, when I said the basket of 1,500 goods is used to determine the inflation rate, I mentioned to you that not all products have the same difference in price. And that's why they work with an average rate of inflation. In this one question, we are working with two different inflation rates, of which the first one was a negative inflation rate, which caused the drop in the price. Now, with the flour, it has a positive inflation rate of 1,6. So, it already shows you that the per item, the inflation rate is not the same. And that's why the average is used. But let us go and calculate this one to see how it will be calculated. It is very similar to the one of the house, where we had now the price of the flour. Just write here what we are working with now. The flour's price in February was 72.24 rand. Now they say the inflation rate is 1,6%. So it's similar to the house. Now remember, there are two possible ways to calculate it. I can say either it is the 100% of the price plus the 1,6%, which is equals to 101,6%. And then I can say it is the 72.24 multiplied by 101,6%. And if I take my calculator, I will say 72.24 multiplied by 101,6, because it's percent, divide by 100, and that gives me the answer of 73 rand. And now be careful for the rounding. I'm going to write all the digits down and just remind you of how to round. Remember, it's money, but in any case, we only round to 2 decimals. And then I look at the one next door. If it is 5 or more, it's going to change that one. So if I round it, it becomes a 0 and a 4. So the new price will be 73 rand and 40 cents. And that's the new price of the flour. Remember, the alternative method is to first calculate the 1,6% and then to remember to add it to the 72 rand 24. Right, so now you have done both an example, I'll just show them to you again, of calculating the change in the product, of calculating the inflation rate, but be careful when there's a decrease. Always remember it's the new price minus the old price over the old price. Substitute, simplify, and don't get a fright when there's a negative, because the moment you see a negative, you know that it is a decrease. And then, like similar to the house, if inflation is added, I can either calculate the 1,6% first and then add it, or add it to the percentage, and I found my value. Remember to round your answers to 2 decimals. Right, we continue now with the next one. Here is an example of a graph again. Remember, paper 2 likes to ask questions on interpreting data. And here is once again The annual inflation rate, I want to emphasize this, the annual average inflation rate from January 2008 to March 2009. Now here are different types of questions that could be asked. If I look at this graph, one possible question can also be, once again, what trend do you notice? Because this shows us how the inflation rate is just keeping on increasing and increasing. But these questions, these questions says, by what percentage did the price increase from October 2006 to October 2007? Please, when you use a graph to interpret information, take a pen or a pencil or a highlighter and go and mark the information. You don't have to keep it clean. Take your color pen or whatever you have available. Go look for October 2006. There's October 2006. And please use your ruler, because I can't use my ruler now. But what is the value that we find? Is 5,4%. So that is the first value that you will write down. And the next value is October 2007. So now I have to go to October 2007, and I take my ruler and I go and I find the value of October 2007. And what do you notice then? The values of the two will be then 5,4%, and October's is 8,4%, and the difference then will be 3%. So by what percentage did it increase? From 5,4% to 8,4%, and that will give you, 7,9%, not 8,4, 7,9%, and that gives you, if I 7,9% minus the 5,4%, and that gives you a difference of 2,5%. Another possible question, in which months and years was the inflation rate 7%? Now I go to my y-axis, I look at 7, and if I can find all the 7s, I can go down and say, oh, but it was April 2007. The another 7 is June 2007, and another 7% is July 2007. Just use your rulers and make sure that you interpret the value correctly. There's another possible question on inflation. Now we've come to the last part of inflation, and that is the Consumer Price Index. This is the last possible calculation that is required of you to do. But before you can do it, it is very important that you must first, once again, understand how it works, because you cannot calculate it if you don't understand it. Now let us look. The index reference period. Now that is the first part that sounds very strange. The index reference period is a specific year, because when we calculate the CPI, we work from a specific year. Now if you look further, it says it is called the base year. So we work from a specific year, and that year is the base year. You can work from any year. You can say, let's see from 2010 what was the difference in the CPI. You can say, let's work from 1900s and see what is the CPI. Just as long as you have the price of your base year. We will do an example of that now. It often differs both from the weight reference period and the price reference period. That means today something costs maybe 10 Rand. 4 years ago it was 6 Rand. So the base year will be 6 rand. And now it's 10 rand. That's why they say they differ from each other. This is just a matter of rescaling the whole time series to make the value of the index reference period equals to 100. That is very important. So your base year, the original year that you start doing your calculations from, is always 100. Now, sometimes, once again, they give you a table with the base year and all the other values, but they can also ask you to calculate that. But don't worry, I will show you how. Now, this is how it's done if they don't give you the base year. Choose one item you have purchased in the past. Try to find something that you have an exact number for and what you have recently purchased as well. This product will be your reference CPI or your base. Write down the price of the reference CPI. The starting CPI is always 100. Now here is an easy example. A pen costs R1.50 in 2012. This now will be your core CPI of 100 for the first year. Now, this is in 2013, that same pen costs R1.75. Now, I don't have the CPI of that year, but I can find it. And how? Very easy. Just take the value of the second year and divide it by the value of the first year. And it gives you a CPI of 116.6. What do you notice? Now I've got two CPIs. I've got my first CPI of 100, and I've got my second CPI of 116. And now the best part is, from those two CPIs, I can calculate the inflation rate. Here is another formula. But I wonder if you can spot the similarity again. It is the CPI of the second year minus the CPI of the first year over the CPI of the first year. Can I substitute those words with other words? The new CPI minus the old CPI over the old CPI, and of course, because it's a percentage, multiply by 100%. Formula, second rule, substitute. There's my second CPI. I've already determined it. The first one was 100 over the original one, which of course was also 100, multiply by 100%, and that gives you 16.6%. That is the last calculation that you must be able to do. I'm just going to shortly repeat it again. You must be able to find the CPI, but remember, they'll never expect you to do something if they don't give you enough information. So they would have given you the two prices of the 2 years. And from those two prices, you can find the first one will be the 100, the CPI of 100, and the second one you can calculate by dividing the second one by the first one. And then I can calculate my inflation rate, which is similar to the one that we have already used. So that is it. Now let's look at the examples they used in a previous exam. If you want to go and consult the whole question paper, it is November 2010, paper 2. Question 5, there it is. In the question paper, they explained what was CPI, but I am sure all of you will know now what is CPI. But if you don't, just read it again. The consumer price index is the price of a collection or a basket. Remember now what the basket refers to, of goods and services. and the prices of these goods and services are collected every month. And the total cost of a basket is compared to that of the previous month's total. And remember, over a period of a year, they find the average or the mean, and that gives us our annual inflation rate. The CPI is the official measure of inflation. Don't confuse the two. Inflation rate is the percentage one, but CPI is the Consumer Price Index. It's a long word, so remember it's a long number. It will always be 100 or more. Inflation is generally given as a percentage and the measure of how much the price of goods and services have increased over a period of time. In 2008, the Statistics South Africa, remember I said if you want to know more you can always Google their website, decided that a fruit basket should consist of bananas, apples, oranges, lemons, since these types of fruits are generally available throughout the year. So can you remember previously I told you there's a CPIF where it only works with food. Now in this instance they only work with fruit and not food. The graph drawn on an annexure F, I will show that to you now, shows the month-on-month changes in the CPI from January to December as expressed as a percentage. Remember, then it is the inflation rate. Now it says, use the graph drawn on the annexure to follow the question, answer the following questions. Now I just want to highlight the words, and if you can, just jot the keyword down, because I'm going to go to the graph and then you're going to forget what the questions ask. So let's look at the keyword, and if possible, write them down for me. The first one says, name the consecutive months between which there was no change. Okay, so that's the keyword. I want you to write down no change. So we're going to look at the graph where there's no change. Then number B said, which months was the CPI less? So there's the keyword. Where was the CPI less than that of the previous month? So the first one was no change. The second one was less. Now let's look at the third one. Name the consecutive months between which the increase in the CPI was the greatest. So what is the keyword here? The greatest. For those who are not sure, the word consecutive means the one after the other. So it will not be January, May, December. Consecutive means January, February, March, one after the other in a certain order. That is just some terminology because it often appears in papers. Right, so let's quickly look at our keywords. No change, less than the previous, increase was the greatest. Now I'm going to show you the graph. Let us look at the graph. It is a very interesting graph. Now let's look what it's about. Month-on-month changes in the CPI of a fruit basket. If we go to our x-axis, it shows us the month. And remember when they spoke of consecutive months, January, February, March, none of them are omitted. Then also, what is our y-axis is the percentage change, or what we refer to as the inflation. They've plotted the points, and there you can see a lot of changes in that. But what did the question ask? Remember I said some time ago, a question only has two parts. What do they give? What do they ask? In this instance, they gave us the graph. What was the first thing that they asked? Where was there no change? And if I look on this graph, between those 2 points, can you see that there is not a slope increasing and there is not a slope decreasing? So when a slope is constant, it means there is no change. But the question asks which months. So now I take my ruler and I go all the way down and I see it is between July and August. Remember what the question said? Consecutive months. It means 2 months after each other. And August is after July. Right, now we go to the second question. And the second question said, where was the CPI less than the previous month? Oh, if it's less than the previous month, then it must be somewhere where there is an increase. Because if the one was less than the other, the next one will be more. So now I go look, where is there an increase? Now from February to March, the graph increases. If I look from March to April, what does it say? It also increases. And from May to June, it also increases. And from June to July, it also increases. And there it was the same, there it decreased. And from September to October, it also increased. And from October to November, it also increased. So you are lucky, because this question has about 6 possible answers. You could have mentioned any one of them. The secret was, I cannot say from February to April. Why? Because the question stipulated consecutive months. So it must be either from February to March or March to April, or any of the other relevant. Right, the last question on that section said, where was the increase the greatest? Remember, for an increase to be great, it means the slope is very steep. And if you look at these graphs, there was a slight increase. There was a big increase. There was a fairly average increases. There was a small increase, and there was a big increase. So if I look at the graph, there are 2 possible increases. But for me to make sure which one it is, you will have to go and calculate them. And you can see the first one is from minus 1,8 to another value is 3.9. And if I get the difference between that one, it gives you 5.7%. Now I have to test this one, and it's from 0 to 5.8. And if I subtract it, it gives you 5.3. So which one is the greatest? The one that is from 1.8 to 3.9. Right. So the one that gives you the biggest increase then will then show you which one was the steepest slope. Now, I want to go back to the questions. So the steepest one, sorry, there's a mistake. It was then from October and November. Now, the next question, if I look at question 5.1.2, determine the percentage change from April to May. So let's go to the graph. The percentage change from April to May. How much was it in April? It was 3.9. How much was it in May? Minus 4.1. Because all the units are already in percentage, I can just subtract them from each other and say it is minus 4.1 minus 3.9, and that gives me an average of minus 8. Once again, remember what I said. If the increase is a negative, or the decrease is a negative, or your inflation rate is a negative, it shows you that there was a decrease. Right. The last question on this section. Calculate the price of the fruit basket in May 2008 if it cost 150 in April 2008. Now remember, what did we see? There was a decrease. So now it means that that price must actually come down. So let us quickly calculate that value of the new price. Let us start. The first one. The price of the basket was 150 Rand. Our inflation rate we saw was now minus 8%. So immediately the minus shows me that that price must decrease. So how do I calculate it? There are two ways again. I can already say it's the 100% the original price was minus the 8%, which gives you, it is now only 92% of the value. So then 92% of the 150 Rand, and if I calculate that, remember it's percentage, 92 divide by 100, multiply by the 150 Rand of the price. And now the current value of that basket is 138 Rand. How do I check it? Remember, what did the question ask? It asked, now what will the new value be if the price of the basket was 150 Rand and the inflation rate has a negative. So the price must then decrease. And that's how you check if your answers are correct. Right. Now the next section that I want you to do is the second part of that question as it was in the question paper. There was the graph. Right. There is the second part of that question as it appeared in the question paper of November 2010. In November 2009, Statistics South Africa announced that the annual inflation rate was 5.8%. Now the first question says, determine the price of the bicycle in November 2008 if it cost 1,586 Rand 95 in November 2009. And guess what most children do? They see the price, they see the percentage, and immediately they go calculate 5.8% of the amount. Be careful. Look what the question gives. It says, determine the price of the bicycle in November 2008. The current year is 2009. So what is happening in this question? We are going back. So the price of 1,586 Rand 95 already has the inflation in the price. Remember that first picture in the beginning, that balloon that was so inflated? This price is the inflated price. What do they ask? How much was it before the inflation? Now I wonder how many of you can tell me where in our maths do we use the same principle? Can I tell you? When we work with VAT inclusive and VAT exclusive. Remember, when we speak of VAT inclusive, it means the VAT is already in the price. And often they give you questions to say, what was the amount without VAT? Or they would ask you, how much was the VAT? Now this question works exactly on the same principle. This price of 1,586 Rand 95 is the big fat inflated price. So how are we going to do this? Let me show you. Right. Let's start with our big inflated price. I'm actually going to write it big so that you can remember that this price is already the inflated price. What was added to it? In this price, they have already added the 5.8%. And now I want to know, because remember, this is 2009, and I want to know what was it worth the previous year. And that is the catching point. So you can think this is a typical question, paper 2 question. But it's very easy. It works the same as the VAT. Now, I'm just going to explain it to you, and then I'm going to show you the shorter way. What actually happened is they said 5.8% of an amount, I'm just using a placeholder, gave you the inflation. Right, that was the amount of the inflation. Then they took that inflation and they added it to that same amount to get 1,586 Rand 95. That is what they actually did. And now what are they asking us? Now they are asking us, but what was that original amount? Now the easiest way to do it is to say that it is 1,586 Rand 95, and we're actually dividing by the percentage. But now it is difficult to divide by the percentage. So what do? We multiply with its inverse. So then it becomes multiply by 100 over 105.8. Where did the 105.8 come from? Remember, it was the original 100% of the price plus the inflation, which was 5.8%. So that's where I got my 105.8%. So instead, let me just show it to you. Instead of saying 1,586.95 dividing by the 105.8%, remember 105.8% is a fraction. It's actually 105.8 over 100. But when you divide with a fraction, you multiply with its inverse. We learned that in the lower grades. And that's why I take the value and I multiply it by 100 over 105.8. Just to remind you, it works the same with the VAT. I'm just going to write it here so you can also remember it. If it's VAT inclusive, then you will also take the amount that is inclusive and multiply it by 100, dividing it by 114 to find what the original value was. It's just something for you to remember. But the principle is the same, because this big amount was already inflated with the inflation. And when I work with VAT inclusive, the amount is already with the VAT. It is inside. And that's how I find the answer. And if I calculate that, sorry, let me just put that aside, it will give you 1,499 Rand 95. So that bicycle that was in the second year, in 2009, that bicycle was 1,586 Rand 95. But the question asked in the previous year. So remember, we have to get rid of that inflation. And that's why we multiply with 100 over 105.8. And that gives us, what was it worth the previous year? Right. And the similar principle is applied when we speak of VAT and VAT inclusive. Right, I see that our time is running very short, and there's so 5 minutes left, and there's so much I still want to share with you. I'm going to give you two more questions, because as I say, the time is now unfortunately very short. The first one I want to give you is this question. Because one of the things that I mentioned previously was the purchasing power of something that the purchasing power decreases. If you look at this question number 2, it said, today you paid 340 Rand for 20 energy saver light bulbs. The inflation rate of these bulbs is 9% per year. How many of them will you be able to buy for 340 Rand in 1 year's time? I want to show you this because this is a question where we have to look at the purchasing power of our money. Just to give you then the example, if I say there were 340 Rand, I could buy 20 bulbs, right? And it said that the inflation, I'm just going to abbreviate quickly, is 9% per year. So now I first have to go and look at my price per bulb. So it's going to be 340 divide by 20, and you can take your calculator for that, and that gives you, it was 17 bulbs. So now I need the price of one bulb. Divide by 20, so it was 17 bulbs. No, sorry, 20 bulbs gives you 17 Rand. So now the inflation is 9%. So it's going to be 9%, or I'm going to add it already to the original price, 109% of the 17 Rand, because that is the price per bulb, and that is going to give you 18 Rand and 53 cents. Remember now, this is the new price. I'm going to write it here, the new price with the inflation. So I'm going to draw a big balloon around it so that you can see it is the inflated price. So now the question said, I still only have 340 Rand. Now it says, how many bulbs can I buy in a year's time? So I have to go and divide it in the new price with the inflation. So it's 340 divide by 18.53, and that is equals to, now be careful, 18 comma, if I round it, 35 bulbs. But tell me, can I go buy a half a bulb or a 0.35 bulb? No, because I only have that money. So I can't round it up to make it another bulb. In this case, I must round it down. So rounded, I'm only going to buy all 18 bulbs. Right, that is just to show you how the purchasing power decreases. If I have had 340 Rand, I could have bought 20 bulbs, but because of inflation that increased the price per bulb, I could now, for the same amount, with the new inflated price, I could only buy all 18 bulbs. I'm really sorry that we have run out of time. I just want to show you where the CPI was calculated. Just an example, there is a table where the CPI was already calculated for you, and then there's just questions that were asked. From those two, remember the formula. If I have two values, I can find the inflation rate. By substituting my values into my formula, I can find the inflation rate. Right. Unfortunately, we have come to the end, and all I can say is enjoy these last few weeks that you have left as a grade 12 learner. Remember, what you put in is what you are going to get out. So I really want you to work hard And you know the secret with maths is practice, practice, practice. All the material you can find, do them, practice them, go back to your teachers if you are not sure, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.